All right. Oh, yes, Michael, you have your hand up.
I saw that announcement from a couple days ago off Discord.
Oh, yeah, about canceling class?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll talk about that. No worries. Okay, I think the participants list has kind of settled down a bit, so go ahead and get started. I hope everyone had a good weekend. I am back home now, which I said, but if you just joined, I'm back home, so hopefully we'll have less issues this time. All right, so this week's subject is file handling. We'll get into that. But first I had a couple announcements, so Replit as always. Talked about this before, but we have our optional bonus meeting August 8th. That is 2 weeks from today. Same time as class, same link as class. More of an informal discussion. I'll talk kind of about myself and ASD. But yeah. Okay, yeah, what people have been asking about. So I will have to cancel class this Thursday. That is Thursday, July 28th. I had something come up in my family that I can't really negotiate around. So we'll be able to have class. Yeah, class will resume Monday, August. Oh, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. This should say, let me escape and change this. Class will resume Monday, August 2nd. Yes, thank you for that correction. All right, class will resume Monday, August 2nd. And this
it's August 1st.
Is it Monday, August 1st? Oh my goodness. It'll resume on Monday. August 1st. We'll resume on Monday. Okay. Yeah, that's okay if you're out of town. You can watch. Oh, okay. Yeah, perfect. If you're out of town, I'm out of town. We're all out of town. All right. Everyone go on a trip. But yeah, so yeah, I'm sorry. I tried really hard to be able to do class, but I just really won't be able to. Medical stuff with my family. Everything should be okay though. Okay, but this brings us to the penultimate week of class. So we are in the next to last week of class. Next week is the last week. It is week 10 of our 10-week class. Pretty crazy. It seems like it went really fast for me, at least. So this week, like I said, we're going to learn about file handling. Next week, we'll have a very quick session on importing libraries, but I don't think that'll take super long. So I thought I could kind of leave the last couple topics up to the class. A couple being the ones that I've listed here. So I'm a data scientist. Basically that just means that I work with data, and mostly I use Python. So we could do like a quick data science intro with a library called pandas. We could make like plots and graphs with matplotlib. Some people have been asking me like, how do I use this stuff that I teach in the class? Like, what is the actual application of these things? So another topic could be like, what does Miranda do as a programmer? Like, how does she actually use all of this stuff that we learned throughout the summer? So I'd be happy to take you through maybe something that I do for work. Another one could be how to set up Python on your personal computer. So we've been doing it in Replit, but if you wanted to work with Python on your own computer for whatever reasons, we could kind of have a little tutorial on how to do that. And then a final one that I thought might be useful is how to debug your code, which just means how to figure out errors. So I do get some emails for people being like, why doesn't my code work? And there's some steps, because I won't be around forever. There's some steps that you can do to kind of go through and figure out why your code doesn't work, learn how to read the Python errors, and learn what websites are good for figuring out bugs in your code. So I'm going to release a Zoom poll now, if I can find the button where it went. Here we go. Okay, yeah, so you should be able to see the poll now. Go ahead and fill it out. If you don't know yet, you want to think about it or something, you can email me later. Or if for the people who are watching this recording, you can also just email me, since you can't fill out this poll live. I want to make sure we get everyone's interests. So I'll probably do multiple topics. It won't just be, that's why I'm letting you choose more than one. Because if we do something like, I don't know, if we do something like how to debug your code, we'll probably have extra time to do some other stuff. So if we do data science, we'll probably also do graphs, because it kind of makes sense to do those together. But yes, so no class on Thursday. But next week, we have some options. So yeah, go ahead and fill that out. Looks like we have most people. So I'll just leave that up if you want to think about it. And you can also email me. So Are there any questions? I think that's all I have before we get into actual class. Oh, I have this to talk about. So hold off on questions for 1 second. So this is called Project Euler. It looks like Euler, it's pronounced Euler. I love these challenges. They're just little fun coding challenges. I did this after I learned Python. I started doing these, and they're little like math-based problems. And they're math problems, but they require programming to solve because of not because the math is necessarily really hard, but because it's math that requires like a lot of repetition or something. You'll see if you read one of the problems, there's a lot of ones about finding prime numbers. They're really great fun if you like math or logic programming stuff. So you have learned all of the tools that you need to be able to do these. So I highly recommend them if you want to practice things. They're really good if you get a lot of them done. You can put it on your resume because it's actually pretty impressive. I haven't done any in a while, but I think I've done 12 because they're pretty challenging, but they're great to think about. And there's like thousands of challenges in their archive. I recommend starting at the beginning because typically the beginning is the easiest and then it just gets harder as it goes. But basically you write your code and you run your code, and whatever answer you get at the end, you submit that and it'll tell you if it's right or wrong. And if it's right, it just adds it to your like profile kind of, but no one really looks at your profile. It's just for you. So anyway, I highly recommend this if you're like, oh, I want more Python. Okay, now are there any questions about class things or announcements or anything? Okay, I'm not seeing any come through. So now we will talk about file handling. So file handling is just a fancy way to say programmatically working with files. So using your program, using Python to open, read, and edit files. So in Python, you also might hear me say, or with programming in general, you might hear me say write files. That just means inserting text into it. Write pretty much means edit and save. So if you hear me say write, that means kind of the same as editing. But doing this in Python or in programming in general is very useful to work with text files because then you can import text data. You can read files, like if we're going to be looking at like if we had written a grocery list as a text file, if we want to read that in, or if you download entire books and then you want to find specific sections of books or something. So there's a lot of different applications of this. And this is kind of one of our first looks into handling like data from some other source. So today we'll just be creating most of our text files, but you can imagine if someone gives you a text file and they need you to find a specific word in it or to just read lines from it. So we'll get into that. And it is just text files. I think you can use Python file handling with other kinds of files, but it's just not that great. So most of the files that people use in Python are text files. Okay, so there are a couple things about files that you need to know, such as file permissions. So you may have run into this if you are maybe working on, if you have Google Docs or something, if someone shares a Google Doc with you and you don't have permission to view it, that means that you don't have permission to read it. And so it's the same with files on your computer. You can actually set files for different users. You can say who's allowed to read or write or edit certain files on your computer. It's kind of the same in Python. So when you are opening a file in Python, you will have to specify what the permissions for your program are. And this just means like for the rest of your program, what are you allowed to do with the file? And so first there's the read permission. That just means you're allowed to open the file and you can read the contents of it. So you can't change it necessarily, but you can read it in. And this is denoted by the string R. So I put quotes around it because when you talk about file permissions, it's actually a string. And we'll see how to use those. The other permission is write. So this is, like I said, it's editing and saving a file. This is denoted by W. And I think that's the only ones. Yeah, so then read and write. It allows you to both read a file and edit a file. And so you just basically put the R and the W together, say RW. That just means read and write. So the permissions, they're like permission codes or whatever. It's basically just letters that represent what you're allowed to do. So you're allowed to read or you're allowed to write. And then this is just like read and write. So Yeah, I think you can. Someone asked if you could do WR instead of RW. I'm pretty sure you can. I always see it written as RW for whatever reason, but I am fairly certain. And you can always try it out and see if it works. But I'm pretty sure you could also do RW. So these are the main ones: read, write, and then read and write. There are a couple others, other permissions and stuff,
looks like it says hold record.
but ones that we won't use. All right, yeah, don't do that, whatever that was. Yeah, so read, write, read and write. There's other ones, but you won't really need them. Okay, and then like I said, this determines how you can interact with the file. So basically you just set these permissions to as like safety features basically. So if you don't want to be able to edit the file or overwrite things that are already in it, you just set it to read. And if for whatever reason you want to be able to write a file but not read what you wrote, you would just set it to write. I've never seen anyone actually do that. Okay, so when you have files on your computer and Python reads them in, it uses something called a file object. And this is just basically a variable in Python that holds the information. It's like a stand-in for what we're using as the file. And so usually you'll name this FO or FO. This stands for file object. You can really name it whatever you want, but to make sure you know that it's the file object, usually you'll name it FO. So, and the way that you create these file objects is by using the open function. This opens the file and then turns it into a file object, which just means it makes it so that Python can interact with it. The open function takes 2 arguments. So we talked about functions and arguments last week. So the first argument is the file path as a string. So make sure it's in quotes. Someone just asked, does this accept any file format? Technically, maybe. I only see it with .text files. I believe it works the best with .text files. Other files, you may run into problems. I'm sure you could get it to work, but I would use text files every time. But yeah, so the open function takes the file path as a string, most likely a text file. Make sure that this is actually the path to the file. So if your Python script and the file that you want to open are in the same folder, then you can just put the file name because they're in the same. You don't have to put what folder it's in. But if it's in a different folder, you will have to put the path to it, or else Python won't know where to look for it or where to find it. And then the second argument that you give is read and write permissions as a string. So like I said, we have R in quotes, we have W in quotes, or we have RW for read and write. I'm seeing some other questions here about like other file formats. Yeah, exactly. So you can open images in Python. You have to add on another letter here to the permissions, and it would be the letter B stands for binary, and that's how Python opens pictures. We're not going to talk about that because I just don't want to get into that today. But if you want to look it up, you can look up like how to open other file formats in Python. Okay, I'm seeing a bunch of stuff come in. So yeah, people are just talking about file formats. But yeah, you can use PSD. Yeah, exactly. So custom file formats like Photoshop or something might have problems, but if you want to open like a PNG or something, you technically can, but we're not going to talk about that. So just forget that I said that. But basically, you create this file object and you assign it with the assignment operator. So like we said, the assignment operator is equals. And so if we want to create this file object, we say FO equals open, then myfile.txt is the name. This would mean that it's in the same file as our Python program because we didn't add a directory to this. So it's in the same directory. So myfile.txt, and then the permissions are read write. And as I said, we usually call these faux, but it's just convention. You can name it whatever you want. Some people name it F, but you don't want to give it a name that makes it look like a regular variable that you can use or something, because all you can do with a file object is open it and read the text. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about opening. But before we do that, does anyone have questions about what we just said? We had good questions about like file formats and stuff. Are there any other questions about working with files in Python? Gonna take a sip of water. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions come in. As always, feel free to ask questions if you're confused. So let's talk a bit about the open function. Okay, I just saw a question come in. I think there are Python programs that implemented reading the text and then printing them or combining them with strings. Yes. Yes, we will talk about how to do that as well. Okay, so the open function. So I just wanted to show you like the parts of it because it can be a little confusing. So first we have just what you're naming your file object, the variable name basically. I always do faux. We have open, your file path as a string, and then your permissions as a string. So if we just wanted this to be only read, so read only, we can't edit it, we would get rid of this W here, we would just have the R. If we wanted only write, for whatever reason, we would get rid of the read, the R, and just have W. But most of the time with file handling, you'll probably want to be able to read it and edit it. Unless it's some kind of protected file with very important information, then you'll want to just read. So RW is pretty common. So this is just basically like the parts of the open function. And then I originally had this closer to the end of the slides, but I realized it's important to just say right out. We're going to talk about, so we talked about opening the file. We're going to talk about editing the file. But I want you to know that after you're done editing, you need to close the file. So you do this by calling whatever you named it. So in our case, we named it FO. You say fo.close. That will close the file. If you don't close the file, it'll actually like technically stay open on your computer until something else closes it. And then this could cause problems like if you call the function multiple times or you're running different Python scripts and they're all trying to open the same file and it's staying open, then you're going to have discrepancies between which programs have edited it and then saved their edits. It just gets very chaotic very quickly. So you always want to close the file. Always close the file. Like I said, it prevents loss of data. And then the same file won't be opened all at the same time on different programs. So this is how you do it. So we've learned how to open the file. So we have fo equals open. And then in this case, I'm showing you an example of when it's in a different folder. So my folder / myfile.txt. This is a relative path. So this would be our Python script is located in some folder. Next to the Python script is another folder called my folder. And inside that folder is myfile.txt. So that's how you would write this path. We'll practice this, don't worry. And then read for read only, R for read only. So read the file or something, do something with the file. And then at the end, when you're done, do fo.close. Always remember that. Okay, so now we've talked about opening the file, we've talked about closing the file. Let's get to the interesting stuff where we're actually doing stuff with the file. So you create your file object like we just said. And then once you have it, you can use methods, which we have talked about. That's when you use the dot and then the function name. You can use methods to read its contents. So when you just have a file set to read only, you're not allowed to create any files. So if the file doesn't exist, if you say like back here, if there actually was no file here called myfile.txt or this directory didn't exist, if the file doesn't exist, Python will throw an error. It will get mad at you and none of your code will work. I put a star here because it will create the file if the permission is RW. We'll talk about that in the next couple slides, but that's because you have write permissions. But if you just have the R here, then if the file doesn't exist, it'll throw an error. Your code won't work. So to read a file, you can say, there's a couple different ways. We're going to talk about this one. fo.read reads the entire file. Or if you pass in a number into the parentheses as an argument, you can specify a number of bytes. 1 byte is typically 1 character. So if you want the first like 10 characters of a file, you would say fo.read, and then in parentheses, you would put 10. Yes, Anthony.
What's a byte?
So yeah, a byte is a portion of memory. In this case, it's most likely just going to be a character. So like the letter A or the letter F or the letter N, something like that.
Oh, okay. Okay.
When I think of a byte, I think of something like a megabyte or a gigabyte or a terabyte or those kinds of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like storage on a phone. Yeah, so yeah, we've got some byte facts coming in. So yes, a byte is just a measure of storage on typically on computers. It's digital storage. So you have bytes, you have megabyte, you have gigabyte, you have kilobyte. It's just how to specify like how much data you have. So in this, you don't really need to know a ton about bytes for this class. But if you put in a number here, it would probably amount to characters. So the first 10 characters or something. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you've probably seen kilobyte, there's KB, a megabyte MB, and gigabyte GB before. So yeah, but yeah, so someone else had put in a thing about large files. So like I said, fo.read reads the entire file. So this is not recommended for large files. So like if you have a file that's like a gigabyte or larger, even like 50 megabytes or something, you don't need to memorize a specific number. But if your file is not big enough for you to just like open in a text editor and see the whole thing on one screen, it's probably too big for Python. And it might take up a lot of memory. So you don't really want to use this one a ton unless your file is very, very small. fo.readLine will read just a single line from the file. So this is always denoted by the new line character, or whenever you press enter in like Notepad is a popular text editor. So if you just opened Notepad and created a file, whenever you press enter, it's actually creating a new line character. So fo.readLine basically just reads line by line until it encounters a new line character. And that's actually a really useful one to just read a file. You can use loops to just go through and read one line at a time. And then you're not putting the whole file into memory. Similarly, read lines reads all the lines in the file or a specified number. So mostly when I see people use read lines, they are putting a number in here like 2, and then that will just read the first 2 lines. And just checking the chat here. Yep, we're just spouting some file facts. All right, so for reading our file, we've got read line, and we've got read lines. All of these you can put a number in. So this one will return number of bytes or number of characters. Yeah, that's so okay. So that's a good question. What counts as a line? Anytime in a text editor here, let me show you. This might be easier. So I'm going to create a new file here in Replit. I'm just going to call it myfile.txt. So in a text file, you'll usually see these line numbers over here. But in a text file, a line is anything that you do. So here is line 1. When I press enter, now we're on line 2. So line 2, hello world. So this one has 3 lines. So yeah, so even though we don't see the like \n character here, we pressed enter and put it on a new line. So the enter, when you press enter in a file, it will record that as a new line character without showing you, but you can also have a new line character here. So I hope that makes sense. It's basically just lines in a file until this line ends and this line begins. So I hope that answered your question. Let me know if I need to explain it a bit more. Okay. Yep, \n is good for starting a new line. Okay, I didn't have to do that. So next we have some examples. So let's just start with this one. So I have myfile.txt. If we look over here, if we look at this, we can see Replit lets you create files. So if you didn't see how I did that, I just did add a new file. You can type in the name. So in this one, I called it myfile.txt. I'm going to come up with a different name so that I don't, I'm going to call it myotherfile.txt or text. With Replit, you type in the name and then you click on like this drop-down thing that comes down. It's kind of weird. And then it'll open it over here. You can tell you're in your text file because this tab here is labeled with the file name that you gave it. And then you can just like type. And now we have the text file. So that's what I'm going to be doing for reading in files. And I'll show you guys these files so that maybe if you want to copy it down. So this is the one that we'll be working with first. I just have here is line 1 and then a \n. I have line 2 and then I have hello world. So if you just want to type out something, make your own file in Replit. And I'll give you just like a couple minutes to do that to make sure everyone can get there. And then we're going to start actually reading in our files. So just like a minute or so, I'll do at 27, we'll start on our program. And of course, if you're ready before then and you want to get a head start, feel free to do that. So 1 minute. Okay, so it is 27. If you're not ready, let me know. Otherwise, we'll start. Okay, so we have this text file. I'm going to go to our main.py. You can ignore these comments down here. It's just notes for me on what I wanted to do. So I'm going to have our finding our main function. Go back down, make sure we have the call to main. And now I'm going to start with a file object. So what do I do when I want to open a file? Someone type into chat how we create our file object and actually open the file. And for this specific file, we want read and write permissions. All right, yeah, I'm seeing some RWs, but what do we actually type to open the file? So like, what would this line of Python be? Yeah, so I saw it pop up. So yeah, the whole line, you need to define it. So we have file equals open. And then, yeah, the one that I'm using is myfile.txt. And then comma, I want to be able to read and write. So that's how we create our file or open it. If this didn't exist, it would create the file. We'll talk about that when we talk about writing. Okay, let me respond to this real quick. Just a quick question about Replit. So yeah, if you have trouble with Replit and you can't log in or something, that's okay. I'm pretty sure you can just do it as a guest, like you don't need an account. Okay, so file object equals open, myfile.text, read write. And if you're not able to follow along today, of course, we'll have the recording up. And you can just like watch what I do today or take notes and stuff. It's totally okay. All right, so we've opened our file and now we want to read it. So I'm gonna show you how to do, so if we did read, so I'm gonna say print fo.read and it should print the whole thing. So if I run this, oops, nope, value error. What just happened? I just have exactly one of create, read, write, append. I did. Okay, I did something wrong. Oh yeah, David, what?
In Java, I used a try catch block exception to make sure I don't get the same file error like I do in Python. But how do we do the same thing like that? That's a big question. We have to figure it out.
Yeah, so there are things in programming called try and except, or try and catch. I would just look it up, look up Python try, if you're interested in stuff like that. But I don't really get into that in this class. Okay, must have exactly what I create right in append mode. All right, what did I do wrong? fo.read. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing for a quick, because obviously did something wrong. Okay, here, actually, I'll share because this is great to do because everyone can forget how to do stuff. All right, so I'm just gonna Google file handling Python.
I thought you were going to say
And
you were
I'm
going
gonna
to give
do-
us a break.
W3 schools, what break?
A break from
Break.
the class lecture.
Not today. That's literally what I did. Run. I'm honestly not sure what's happening here.
Are you sure you didn't leave anything out?
Hold on, I'm gonna ask for assistance from my. Change. Okay, so I've just been informed Python in the most recent version, you can't do RW, you have to do R+ to read write. Ah, that worked. Okay. Python changes sometimes from the time that you learn it in class to the time that you teach it. So thank you all for your help in trying to debug it. I hope, if anything, you got from this that even teachers sometimes have to Google things or ask for help. But okay, so if we want to read and write, we'll do R+. Since we don't really, we're just learning about reading right now, I'm just going to do R. So then it reads it. So that reads the whole file. Now, if we want to print just one line, we can do fo.readline. Okay, yeah, don't interject with things or you won't be able to participate in class. Okay, so we're gonna have fo.readline, and that will just read one line. Here is line 1. And so it actually prints as \n because I wrote it in there in the file, but I'm pretty sure it also counts as a line break. And then if we want to read, okay, if you are unmuting yourself and making noises, if I have to mute you one more time, okay. Sorry, it keeps unmuting. Okay, yeah, no problem. Did you do Python 2 before? Now you do Python 3. Oh, yeah. So someone asked me about, sorry, I just saw that. Yeah, so did I do Python 2? No, I did Python 3, but they still update Python. So I think when I don't even know what Python 3 version it was on when I was learning it. And now we're on Python 3.10.11, something like that. So even in the small updates, they update things. Yeah, 3.10.5. Okay, so sorry, I'm getting distracted by reading, making sure I'm seeing all your questions. Okay, I have seen all your questions. All right, so like we did just read line, and it printed the first line. We could call this again, and it'll read the next line. And so here, so we have our first line, and then we have line 2. And so the reason that it does that is because just like when you're in a text editor and you have your cursor, so you can see me, I'm moving my cursor around. Python has its own cursor. And after it reads a line, it moves the cursor to the end of that line. So just to show you this visually, so if I am Python, hello, I am Python, I'm going to read this line. So I'm highlighting this whole line. And then once I've read it, my cursor goes here. And then it says read the next line. So I go down here and read this line, and then my cursor is here. And then I read, maybe if I just read the first 5 characters or 5 bytes, then my cursor would be here. And if I asked it to read the next 5 or so bytes, it would read the next one. Okay, so I see a question here. How can we save the read line to a string, then read the last half of that string? Yeah, that's a great question. So anything that we do with files, it comes back as a string, so we can save it as a string. So if we wanted to save the first line as a string, we could say line 1 equals fo.read line. And now if we want to print line 1, or you could print, like you were saying, you wanted to print the last half of it or something, you could print, you could use slicing. So you could do like line 1, depending on how long it is, you could do like 4 to the end, something like that. But basically you can turn it into a string and then print it just like it is a string. So just to make sure you understand what I was saying about cursors, because I got distracted, but question, sorry. So basically Python will go and move the cursor around from whatever it reads, and after it's done reading a specific thing, the cursor stops. And then when you start it up again, in the same program, the same call, so if you start the program over, it'll start over. Then it'll start the cursor down here and read until it gets to the end of the line. And then if you want to start it back up again, it goes like that. So that's not super important to like remember. It's just something to note that if you print, so now if I want to do line 2 equals the next line, I can, because we've already read the first line and saved it, and now we can read the second line. I can print line 2. So if I run this, here's line 1 and then line 2. Okay, so that's read line. Let me show you if you just want to read in a certain number of characters. So we had print fo.read line. If we do 5, it should read like just about the first 5 characters. And so it just says here, and then a space is over here. So that's how you use this. I don't really see that used super often. It's really, unless you just really just want a specific number of characters, but usually you want the whole line. So, and the last one that we had is print fo.read lines. So if we, and does it start from 0? I saw that question. Yes, everything that is counted in Python starts from 0, or indexed. Well, okay, if you're talking about position, it does start from 0. If you're talking about like counting out lengths or something, so in this case, 5 bytes is like actually if you want 5 bytes, then this, including the space, counts as 5 because you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So starting at 0 is for indexing for positions. Specifying a number is counted like normal. Kind of weird to think about, I know. Okay, that's a great question though. Okay, so now we have read lines, which if we don't put any number in here, we just print it, it will print, oh, it returns it in a list. That's nice to know. Okay, so I guess that's the difference between read and read lines is read will just return all the lines. Read lines will return them as a list, which is really cool. I actually haven't used that a lot, so I didn't realize that it did that. I don't know everything. But so yeah, but if you wanted to just read like the first 2 lines, you could just say read lines 2. And if we ran this, it would just do 2. Oh, I think it might be counting my \n as another line. Actually, I don't know why it just did. Let's see, read lines 1. It prints the same thing. What about 3? There's a Python mystery here. Okay, maybe I'm using that wrong. Yeah, someone is asking, yeah, you can write a big program in only 1 line. Yeah, there's a lot of ones, a lot of competitions. So I thought that read lines, sorry, I'm talking to my spouse here. I thought that you put in a number and it like returned that number of lines. Okay. I don't do a ton of file handling. So that apparently didn't work. Let's Google. Read line and finesse. Python read lines. Oh, don't return the next line if the total number of returned bytes are more than 33. Okay, so that's still bytes. Just kidding. I thought it was something more useful, in my opinion. So that is just, it reads all the lines and puts them in a list. So let's do that again, since I confused myself. You do read lines, and this returns all the lines in a list. Yeah, someone corrected me. It's not Googling if I'm using DuckDuckGo. Correct. I am DuckDuckGoing. Okay, and so yeah, I see some. So it's not necessarily a new thing for me. There's a lot of things in Python or in programming that when you learn a lot of different programming languages, you forget small things like what's very specific functions do that you don't use a lot. And so that is perfectly fine. So if you are learning programming for the first time and you're like, oh my goodness, there are so many functions and so many keywords, I don't remember them all, I have to Google them. That is literally what every programmer does, like every day. So as long as you learn it at least once or twice, and then you're able to know what you need, that like kind of know what you need, and then you're able to Google like the function to figure out like what the arguments are, that's totally okay. That's a part of programming. So don't be frustrated if you're having to do that, because as you have seen several times today, I have to do that, and I've been programming for several years. But so anyway, that's an aside. Yeah, someone said that's why we have Stack Exchange. So yes, if we do debugging, if we do our debugging class, I will talk about Stack Exchange, which is a wonderful website where you can go and ask programming questions and people will answer them very helpfully. Yeah, forums are great. Okay, so that's about reading the files. Let's jump back here and talk about writing files. Well, of course, I want to pause for questions. Are there any questions? We've kind of been talking a little bit here, but this is definitely a time to ask questions if you have questions about reading the files. Reading files, not reading words. Okay, let's see. I'm not seeing any questions come in. That is okay. So we'll talk about writing next. So if we want to write a text file, it's the same. First you create it. If the file doesn't exist, it will create the file for you. So you just use W, or maybe just R+. Now I'm doubting myself about the existence of W as a whole. Yeah, the alphabet. Not the alphabet, but R+ will let you read and write. So I'll correct these slides later. But basically, you create the file object, and then you can use different methods to edit it, just like we did for reading it. So in the case where you have writing permissions, if the file doesn't exist, it will create the file. So that's very useful. But if the file already exists and you open it and you have write permissions on it, it will overwrite everything already there. So I'll show you an example of that, but this is very dangerous if you want to be able to keep the file that already had stuff in it, and then you open it with write permissions, you have just erased everything that was already in the file and overwritten it with what you want it to be equal to now. So sometimes you don't really care, like when we're just doing example stuff, but if you have actually important information in there, that would be very bad if you erased it. So there's basically just one function that you use for writing, and it's fo.write. And then in here goes the text that you want to write. Make sure it's a string. And so this works, as all of our functions do. You can replace this string here with a variable. So if you have a really long string assigned to some variable myString, you could just have myString here, without the quotes because it's a variable. And then also just a reminder, when you're calling fo.write, you can call it across multiple lines. So you can say fo.write this line, and then on the next line you could say fo.write again. But if you're just doing it all in one large text dump here, make sure that you need to use, make sure to remember that you need to use like new line characters like \n and spaces, or else it'll all just get kind of squashed together, which maybe that's what you want. So let's look at some examples of writing to a text file, and we're going to try out, let's see. So I'm just going over to, this is a great website, W3 Schools. Let's see. Yeah, so you can just put W or R+. Okay. So if we only want to write, we would put W. I can't really think of a reason why you would want to do that. I'm going to do R plus. So all I did was I changed where we opened our file. I had R and then plus for R plus reading and writing. So in this one, I want to show you how it overwrites files after you try to edit them. So we're going to have fo.read. I'm going to read all of the contents of it. And then I'm going to say, oh, I need to print that. So print fo.read. And then print fo. Oh, don't print, sorry. I'm just going on autopilot. And then you want to say fo.write hello. Now, if we read fo again, it will be empty. So if I run this, so let's take a look at my file.txt. So this is what we wrote in the original one. Now if I go over here and I run it, didn't do the same thing. Write hello, fo.read. I'm learning all sorts of things about files today, y'all. I really thought it'd be more straightforward than this. I apologize. fo.write hello, fo.read. Okay, if I just open this for write, what does it do? Not readable. Oh yeah, because I tried to read it. Okay, I see a question. Programmers often put in more specific parameters. Okay, yeah. Just validating that comment there in Zoom. Okay, my replit is not wanting to. Oh no. Okay, there we go. Now it worked. Okay, so that, I'm not crazy. That was a replit error. That makes me feel better about myself. So what we did, just to run through that in case the replit error confused you, I apologize. So we opened it just like normal. We have R plus. We want to print what we read in, and then we want to write hello. And then I believe it didn't work because we printed it again. So then if I get rid of this, it should be hello. So I'm actually going to go back. Yeah, so now it says hello, hello, because it added it again. So you don't, like I said, it's not a good idea to do this on files that already exist or that you care about because it will change them. So if I just get rid of this reading part, because we're going to change it anyway, if fo.open, fo equals open myfile.txt, and then we want to write something like fo.write. This is my new message, and then close it. We run this, nothing really comes up here, but we can go back here and you can see it has overwritten what we originally had. So that is on writing to the file. And I have this note here to make sure we talk about overwriting, which we did. There's something else that you could do, which I have in my slides here, called appending. So just like we talked about appending to lists or appending, I think mostly to lists, yeah. You can add this A permission, which gives write permissions, but instead of overwriting changes, it appends any of your changes to the end of the file. So it doesn't overwrite your previous file contents. So last I checked, it was RA, but I'm going to check that over here. Okay, no, it's just A. It looks like for just write for. Okay, just A. So anyway, the argument is A here, and it allows you to append. So instead of overwriting it, it'll actually add to the end of your file. So what do I mean by that? So if I do this, and I say myfile.txt A, we already know that it says this is my new message. This is, now I'm going to say this is my even newer message, and it will just append that to the very end. So if I run this, and it ran, we go over to this file and check it, and now it says this is my even newer message. And you'll see here, because there's no new line character that we actually put in, it keeps it on the same line. So if we want that to be a new line, we could put \n at the beginning to say start a new line, and then type, this is my even newer message, even. I'm going to replace it so you can see the change. I'm going to put another line. And if I run this, okay. Oh, I ran it twice. Right, and you can see that it actually does the new line character there. So that's what I mean by you need to make sure that you remember your new line character, or else it'll just kind of squash it. Okay, so are there questions about writing to a file or reading? Can you overwrite the original text as well? Yeah, that's just if you open it for writing. So if you had W here, so append, so A for append, we'll put it at the end, but overwriting happens when you use just W. So if I run this, and so it ran, if we go back to our file, now all of the other one is gone, and it just has new line character and then another line. So just W will overwrite, A will append. Yep, so those are the differences between the two. Any other questions? Okay, so we just have a couple more slides. See, we're getting to the end here. So that was for appending. So my little example here, you would just do A here instead of RA, but fo.writeHello won't erase the file contents, it'll just add it to the end. So if you're interested in more file handling options, you want to know about opening, like we talked about PNG files or something, you can go to this website. It pretty much has most of the options that you would want for file handling. So if you have a specific use case where you're like, no, I want to do more, go here. But mostly you'll just need reading and writing. So I got a question for what is the file directory of main.py? I wouldn't worry about that. If your text file is in the same directory as main.py, so if you can see it in your little file structure thing, then you need the specific path. I don't know. You'll have to look that up. I would have to look it up to answer you. So my short answer is you look it up. That can help you after class. Okay, so just basically, I wanted to go over like a workflow for file handling. Here, I'm going to put something in the chat. You can use PWD. So a workflow for file handling, I just kind of wanted this diagram because I'm a visual person, but basically just to summarize what we talked about today, you want to create your file object, which just represents your file, and with the open function, you read and write to that file, whatever you need to do with it, and then you close it at the end. Always, always close it. In code, it looks like this. So you have creating your file object. You have a relative path here. You have line1 equals fo.readLine. You can print that line if you want to. You can write. Okay, this should be R+, remember, I'll change it. But you can write to that file. That will actually overwrite the existing document. And then you close it. So always, always open it, do whatever you need to, and then close. Don't forget the close. So this is just some general code. I'll leave it up there for a couple seconds so that you can write it down or something, whatever would be useful to you. Okay, and minding the time. I'll put this back up if you want me to, but just minding the time so that we finish before the hour. I also wanted to mention what's called like with as. So another option for opening files, I talked about you need to open it, do whatever you want, and then close it, always close it. But if you're the type of person that will forget to do that, like I sometimes am, you can also do a phrase like this. So it's called with, and then you have your open function, and then as fo. So it's okay if you don't exactly understand why it does this right now, but basically this with allows you to open it, and then it'll close it for you at the end. So you say with, you have your open function with the name of the file, and then the permissions, which this should be R+. And then this as keyword gives a variable name to what you just opened. So you have with, open the file, as fo. And then you have this colon here and indent your code. because of this colon. And so you can read it, you can do all the stuff that you need to. So like I said, this is a good way to keep all of your file handling in one code chunk. If you don't, if you just need to do a couple things and you want to keep it in the same place, it's a good way to do that. It will open, it assigns it to the object variable, so the FO, and it closes it at the end. So closes it automatically, you don't have to remember to close it. So typically when I am dealing with files, I do something like this where I have with open as FO, and then I do all what I need to, and then I just continue on with my code unindented afterwards. Yeah, so someone said, so you don't need FO.close at the end? No. So when you use this with keyword, this whole line right here, when you're done working with your file, you don't have to close it. So I'll show you what that looks like. So instead of here where we have FO equals open, FO.write, FO.close, I'm going to erase that. I'm going to say with open. What did we call it? My file.txt, comma, and the permissions, in this case it's R+. And then you say as FO, that's just the name we're giving it. Press enter, and it's indented. You can say FO.read. You can put in some other code here. And then when you're done, you can print done with file. You can do, this is just showing you that when you're done, you just unindent. So if we do something like this, then we print done with file at the end. This didn't print because I just asked it to read in the code, but I didn't print it. So if we wanted to actually print that, we could print. But it'll automatically close it at the end. So you don't need the close statement because once, yep, so it prints it and then it says done with file. So once you're done here, after you unindent, it will close the file for you. And then another question, okay, not me. Okay, yeah, just use direct messages if you're asking a specific person, not me, or use Discord. Okay, if you had code and not words, would it run the code without the print? If I had code and not words, like if I had code in the text file, what would it do? Yes, okay, so it would just read it as a text file because of this extension here. .txt is telling it it's a text file, so it doesn't really do anything with the text inside of it. That is a really good point though, because that is actually how a lot of hacking happens, is not all programming languages are that smart, and they will process whatever is in a file, and sometimes it knows that it's a string and sometimes it doesn't. And so that's actually how a lot of very famous like data leaks or hacking has happened in very large companies, is they got sent a file that was just code, and whatever computer received it just automatically ran the code, and it just like destroyed their computers. So that's actually a good point. Yeah. There's a bunch of different stuff you could look up. I forget the actual name of it on the spot here, but it's a very famous way to hack computers. But most people know about that now, so it's like not very common anymore. But that is a way, yeah. So, oh, I was just saying, basically, there used to, before we have websites with HTTPS. Before we had HTTP, there were some other security things. Yeah, the I love you virus. Yeah, so there's a lot of them where basically some computer was sent a file. The file contained code that told the computer to delete all of its data, or send credit card information to an outside person. So a lot of people have had their credit card numbers stolen by this way. But basically, you just send a computer a file with code in it, and the computer opens the file and then just runs the code automatically. But that's not as much of a problem anymore, because people realized that it was doing that and then stopped. Like put in extra measures to do that. I'm not an expert on it, but you can look up a lot of interesting YouTube videos about it. How did they send the file? Okay, so I see we're right at the hour. I'll talk about this a bit more at the end. Stick around if you want to hear it, but I want to make sure that I get all of this out of the way. So, so yeah, just this with as keyword. So yeah, note this colon, indent your code, but you don't need the fo.close. And then I just have some general tips. You can read through these if you want. If you guys have to go, as always, you're fine to head off. I'm gonna keep going through these tips, and then we have some
I
tasks
think I
at the
will.
end. Okay, yeah.
See ya.
Bye. Yeah, if you have to go, just go ahead. But yeah, so I just have these tips. So make sure you specify the relative path, so know where you're starting, and where the relative path to your other file is. If you know that the file exists and Python says it doesn't exist, probably check your file path. Next, remember that writing to the file will erase previous contents. And also, mostly we're just working with text files. So working with other kinds of files is kind of a bit more advanced than the class. We didn't have time to get to these examples, so we'll probably do that next week, or you can look up some examples of this yourself. And then I also have this task here at the end that we'll probably just go over next week. But I want you to write a function that creates a file. It should take one argument, the file name. And then once you create the file, it should write 3 lines of text to that file. The content in the file doesn't really matter here. I just want to make sure you know how to write 3 lines to a file. And then don't forget to close it. And I want you to call that function from your main function. So that is what I have. Yeah, some people put a some famous virus examples in the chat if you're interested. Okay, so yeah, that's really all I have for you today. If you need to stay and ask questions, feel free to do so. I'm back home, so I can answer questions and emails and stuff. And if you're interested, I think Donovan asked about the virus. I can talk a little more about it. So I'm going to stop the recording.